What's the darkest thing a family member has ever done to you? My parents erased my identity before I was old enough to spell it, forcing me to live as their dead son for 14 years while burying the daughter they actually had. When my body finally betrayed their elaborate lie, the truth shattered everything I thought I knew about myself. This isn't just another family drama. It's a raw journey through psychological manipulation, desperate rebellion, and the brutal fight to reclaim an identity that was stolen from me. Could you survive being someone else's memorial? Do you have the courage to defy the only love you've ever known? Stay until the end to witness how a girl named Emma crawled from the grave they dug for her and discovered that freedom, even with its scars, is worth every battle. My parents dressed me as their dead son for 15 years, transforming me from Emma to Michael with such calculated precision that I didn't realize I was living someone else's life until my body betrayed the carefully constructed lie. The first memory I have of becoming Michael was when I was 5 years old, sitting at our kitchen table in our suburban Boston home, my mother gently correcting anyone who called me Emma. "It's Michael now," she'd say with a tight smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I didn't understand why, but the way her voice softened when she called me by this new name made me want to be Michael more than anything. That summer, my mother took me shopping for new clothes, polo shirts, cargo shorts, and tiny Nike sneakers that lit up when I walked. I remember standing in the boys' section of Target, watching her methodically select items from the racks, her movements precise and deliberate, as if conducting a sacred ritual. "You're going to look so handsome," she whispered, and the pride in her voice made my chest swell with happiness. At 5 years old, all I wanted was to see that look in her eyes, that perfect blend of love and approval that seemed to only appear when I was being Michael. When I started kindergarten that fall, my parents had already informed the school about my preferred name. No one questioned it. Not the teachers who called roll and paused briefly at my birth name before using Michael instead. Not the school administrators who filed away the forms my parents had signed. The system was designed to be accommodating, and in their efforts to be progressive, they became unwitting accomplices to my parents' deception. At home, the transformation continued. My bedroom walls, once a pale yellow, were repainted a deep blue. The stuffed animals I'd cherished were quietly replaced with action figures and miniature sports equipment. Family photos were rearranged, some disappearing entirely from our walls. It was as if Emma was being erased, pixel by pixel, replaced by this boy named Michael who everyone seemed to love so much more. The strangest part? I didn't resist. In fact, I embraced it. When I'd look into my parents' eyes as they called me their handsome little man, their faces would illuminate with such profound happiness that I became addicted to it. Their love was conditional, but I didn't know that then. I just knew that being Michael made them happy, and making them happy made me feel whole. By the time I was 7, I had mastered the art of being Michael. I walked with a slight swagger that I'd practiced in front of my bathroom mirror. I kept my voice deliberately low, even though it sometimes hurt my throat. I asked for my hair to be cut shorter and shorter until it was a neat, boyish crop that my mother would ruffle affectionately. "My perfect little man," she'd say, and my father would beam with pride from across the room. In 2nd grade, the question started. Not from me. I was still too young to truly understand what was happening, but from my classmates. "Why do you use the boys' bathroom?" A girl named Lily asked during recess one day, her head tilted in genuine confusion. I straightened my shoulders and summoned all the authority a 7-year-old could muster. "Because I'm a boy," I said firmly, repeating the line I'd been taught to say whenever anyone questioned me. "This is just how things are." Lily looked unconvinced but shrugged and ran off to join the other girls' jumping rope. That night, I told my parents about the interaction, expecting them to be proud of how I'd handled it. Instead, my mother's face drained of color, and my father immediately suggested we move to a different school district. "No one can know," my mother whispered, gripping my shoulders so tightly it hurt. "Promise me, Michael. This is our special secret." I promised, not understanding what I was promising or why it mattered so much. All I knew was that the desperation in her eyes frightened me more than anything I'd ever seen. We didn't move schools, but my parents became even more vigilant. My father started coaching my little league team, ensuring he was always present to deflect questions or concerns. My mother joined the PTA, carefully monitoring every aspect of my school life. They created an impenetrable bubble around me, a carefully constructed reality where Michael existed without question. And it worked. By the time I was 9, no one remembered Emma anymore. I was just Michael, the kid with the great arm who could throw a perfect spiral, The boy whose lunchbox was always packed with carefully cut sandwiches and handwritten notes from a doting mother. I was living the quintessential American boyhood, complete with fishing trips with my dad and a bedroom adorned with sports trophies and superhero posters. I remember standing in front of my mirror on my 10th birthday, studying my reflection. I was wearing the Red Sox jersey my parents had given me, my hair freshly cut for the occasion. Something felt off, a vague disconnection I couldn't quite name. But then I heard my mother calling me downstairs, her voice lilting with excitement about the chocolate cake she'd made, my favorite. And just like that, the moment of uncertainty vanished. I was Michael, and Michael was loved. What else could possibly matter? But the perfect facade couldn't last forever. The body I was born with had its own timeline, one that wouldn't be denied no matter how many baseball trophies lined my shelves or how perfectly I'd learned to mimic the swagger of the other boys. By 14, the changes became impossible to ignore. My chest began to develop despite the increasingly tight sports bras my mother bought me. My hips widened subtly beneath the baggy jeans I wore. Each morning, I'd stand in front of the bathroom mirror, pressing my palms against my chest, willing it to stay flat, panic rising in my throat like bile. "It's just a phase," my mother would say, her smile tight and eyes darting nervously whenever I mentioned the changes. Some boys develop differently. She bought me even baggier clothes. And my father started suggesting protein shakes and weight training to bulk up my frame. I threw myself into these suggestions with desperate energy, hoping that if I just tried hard enough, my body would finally understand what it was supposed to be. Then came the day that shattered everything. I was in math class, struggling through an algebra problem, when I felt a strange warmth between my legs. Excusing myself to the bathroom, I discovered with horror what every other girl my age already knew about. My first period. Blood. Undeniable, irrefutable evidence that I wasn't Michael. I had no idea what was happening. No one had prepared me for this moment. I genuinely thought I was dying. I called my mother from the school nurse's office, my voice shaking so badly I could barely form words. "Mom," I whispered, "I'm bleeding." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, then the sound of something shattering, a glass or plate dropped in shock. "Stay there," she finally said, her voice hollow. "I'm coming to get you." The 20 minutes I waited felt like hours, my mind racing with terrible possibilities. Was I sick? Dying? The nurse had given me supplies and a sympathetic look but seemed confused by my complete lack of understanding about what was happening. When my mother finally arrived, her face was ashen, eyes red-rimmed. She didn't speak as she signed me out, didn't look at me as we walked to the car. The silence between us was a living thing, growing larger with each passing minute. At home, I found my father waiting, which was strange for a Tuesday afternoon. He should have been at work. As soon as we walked through the door, my mother collapsed onto the couch, her body folding in on itself as she began to sob, deep, guttural cries that seemed to come from somewhere primal and wounded. I reached for her instinctively, but she recoiled from my touch. "Get away from me," she screamed, her voice cracking with emotion I couldn't understand. My father stepped between us, his face grave. "Emma," he said quietly, "we need to talk." Emma, not Michael. Emma. The name hit me like a physical blow. I hadn't heard anyone call me that in nearly a decade. I felt the floor shift beneath my feet as my father gently guided me to the kitchen, away from my mother's desperate sobs. He sat me down at the table, the same table where, 9 years earlier, my mother had first started calling me Michael. My father's hands trembled as he poured me a glass of water, his wedding ring clinking against the glass. "There's something I need to tell you," he began, his voice breaking. "Something we should have told you a long time ago." The truth spilled out of him like water through a broken dam. There had been another child before me, a son, the real Michael. He'd been stillborn, a full-term baby with the umbilical cord wrapped around his neck. My mother had carried him for 9 months, had decorated a nursery, had embroidered his name on tiny blankets, only to return home from the hospital with empty arms. "Your mother." She couldn't process it. My father explained, tears streaming down his face. "She refused grief counseling, refused to talk about him. When you were born a year later, she was still so deep in her trauma that when the doctor said, 'It's a girl,' his voice faltered. She couldn't hear it. She looked at me and said, 'We'll name him Michael.' My father tried to reason with her, he told me. He suggested therapy, medication, time away to heal. But my mother was adamant. In her mind, I was the son she was meant to have. At first, he thought it was a temporary delusion that would pass. By the time he realized it wasn't, I was already answering to Michael, already being raised as a boy. "I failed you," he whispered, reaching for my hand across the table. "I thought I was helping your mother, but I was hurting you. I'm so sorry, Emma." The name felt foreign on my ears, but somehow right in my heart. Emma. I was Emma. I had always been Emma. My entire existence, every friendship, every school experience, every family moment, had been built on an elaborate lie designed to soothe my mother's grief. I wasn't a real person to her. I was a replacement, a living memorial to the child she couldn't save. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice small and unfamiliar to my own ears. My father sighed, running his hands through his graying hair. "I've asked your mother to consider family therapy, but she's resistant. She wants." He looked away, unable to meet my eyes. "She wants you to continue being Michael, at least until you're 18 and move out for college." "Continue?" I echoed in disbelief. "How am I supposed to continue? My body is." I gestured helplessly at my chest, my hips, the evidence of my period still making itself known. "This isn't something I can hide anymore." "I know," he said, his voice heavy with shame. "I know it's not fair to ask this of you, but your mother is in a fragile state right now, and I'm worried about what this revelation might do to her." Something snapped inside me then, a lifetime of suppressed identity suddenly breaking free. "What about me?" I demanded, slamming my palms on the table. "What about what this has done to me? I've been living a lie my entire life because you two couldn't face reality." I stormed out of the kitchen, past my mother still sobbing on the couch, and straight to my bedroom, that shrine to a boy who never existed. With a cry of rage and grief, I tore the sports posters from the walls, knocked the trophies to the floor, pulled the blue comforter from my bed. Beneath all the masculine trappings was still the faintest trace of yellow paint on one wall where the new blue hadn't quite covered it completely, a ghost of the room that should have been mine. That evening, while my parents argued in hushed, desperate tones downstairs, I slipped out of the house. The babysitting money I'd saved over the years was hidden in a sock in my dresser drawer, nearly $400 that was supposed to go toward a new gaming system. Instead, I walked to the mall 2 miles away, my heart pounding with a strange mixture of terror and exhilaration. I went straight to stores I'd never dared enter before. I bought a flowery sundress, a pink blouse, a pair of sandals with small decorative flowers. I selected a package of underwear with lace trim, a bra that wasn't designed to compress but to support. With each purchase, I felt a piece of myself returning, fragments of Emma emerging from the prison where she'd been locked away all these years. The cashier smiled as she rang up my items. "Shopping for your girlfriend?" she asked pleasantly. "No," I replied, my voice stronger than I expected. "These are for me." Her eyes widened slightly, but to her credit, her smile never faltered. "Well, honey, that sundress is going to look gorgeous with your coloring." I clutched the shopping bags to my chest all the way home, half terrified and half overwhelmed with a new, fragile joy. I snuck back into the house as quietly as I could, but my mother was waiting in the kitchen, her eyes red but now cold and calculating rather than distraught. "Where have you been?" she demanded. "Out," I replied, trying to hide the bag behind me. But she was too quick. She snatched them from my hands and looked inside. The color drained from her face as she pulled out the sundress, the fabric soft and flowing between her fingers. For a moment, I thought I saw something like recognition in her eyes, perhaps a memory of the daughter she might have raised. Then her expression hardened. She reached for the kitchen scissors and, before I could stop her, began cutting the dress into strips. "This is not who you are," she said, her voice terrifyingly calm as she destroyed each item I'd bought. "I will not allow this." I watched in horror as she methodically cut through fabric, through lace, through the small plastic flowers on the sandals, tears streaming down my face. When my father heard the commotion and rushed in, she was halfway through destroying the pink blouse. "Stop her," I screamed. "Please." My father stood frozen, caught between his wife's delusion and his daughter's pain. "Karen, please," he finally said, reaching for the scissors. "This isn't right." "Not right?" my mother hissed. "What's not right is you turning against me, against our son." In that moment, looking at my mother's twisted face and my father's helpless expression, I realized they couldn't save me from this. No one in this house could. With shaking hands, I reached for the cordless phone on the counter and dialed 911, not knowing what else to do. but knowing I needed help from someone, anyone outside the toxic bubble of our family secret. The moment those 3 numbers left my fingertips, everything changed. The police arrived quickly, a male officer with salt and pepper hair and a younger female officer whose compassionate eyes were the first truly kind ones I'd seen in days. They separated us, and I poured out my story to Officer Lopez, watching her pen fly across the pages of her notepad as I described the years of deception, the revelation about my brother, the destroyed clothes. "That's extremely serious," she said quietly. "What you're describing is a form of psychological abuse." For one brief, shining moment, I felt hope. Someone believed me. But when we reconvened in the living room, my mother had composed herself beautifully, her voice steady as she wove a tale of a troubled, confused teenager making rash decisions. My father backed her flawlessly, mentioning an upcoming appointment with Dr. Peterson, a specialist in adolescent issues. The male officer nodded sympathetically, looking at me with pity rather than understanding. "These teenage years can be confusing," he said, patting my shoulder. Just like that, the system that was supposed to protect me became another brick in my prison wall. That night, I realized no one was coming to rescue me. I would have to save myself. I found an old notebook and began documenting everything, hiding my journal inside a hollowed-out copy of The Lord of the Rings. At school the next day, I drifted through the hallways like a ghost, the weight of knowing the truth while everyone else still called me Michael, crushing me from the inside. During lunch, I sat alone, barely touching my food, when Jordan Carter, my biology lab partner from last semester, sat down across from me. "You okay, Michael?" Jordan asked, genuine concern in their voice. "I'm not," I whispered, tears threatening. "I'm not okay. And I'm not Michael." Under an oak tree in the courtyard, I told Jordan enough of my story to make them understand. Jordan listened without interrupting, their expression shifting from surprise to determination. "My cousin is transgender," Jordan said when I finished. "He found this place in Boston called Rainbow Youth Center. They helped him a lot." Jordan wrote down the contact information, then added another number. "This is my home number. My mom's a social worker. If you need a place to stay, call us, okay?" I clutched the paper like a lifeline. My chance came 3 days later when my parents had to travel to Connecticut for my grandmother's illness. They left me with Mrs. Abernathy, our elderly neighbor who'd known me as Michael since kindergarten. That night, after she fell asleep, I crept downstairs and dialed Jordan's number with trembling fingers. Jordan's father answered, his voice shifting from casual to concerned when I explained who I was. "Are you safe right now?" he asked. "Yes, but I won't be for long." "Where are you?" "I can come get you." 20 minutes later, I climbed into their Honda Civic, Jordan squeezing my hand in the back seat. "You did the right thing," they whispered. At their home, Jordan's mother Elaine waited with hot chocolate and an open heart. I told my full story this time, holding nothing back. When I finished, Elaine reached out and took my hand. "Emma," she said, and the sound of my true name spoken so naturally by this kind woman broke something loose inside me. "What happened to you was wrong. Profoundly wrong. And we're going to help you." Emma. Just Emma. Not a replacement, not a confused teenager. Just me. The relief was so powerful I began to sob. 14 years of suppressed identity pouring out in a flood. Jordan sat beside me, arm around my shoulders, while Elaine and David simply witnessed my emergence from the prison of Michael. Morning brought reality crashing back. Mrs. Abernathy had called my parents, who were racing home. When we returned to gather my things, a police car already sat in the driveway, a stern-looking officer taking notes. But this time was different. This time, I had allies. David approached the officer, credentials in hand, speaking with the authority of a professional social worker. He outlined the psychological abuse I'd endured, mentioned Rainbow Youth Center, and advocated for me with unwavering conviction. After a lengthy consultation with his supervisor, the officer agreed to let me leave with Jordan's family while the situation was properly investigated. As we prepared to leave, my phone rang. My mother. "Where are you?" she demanded, voice shrill with anger. "What have you done?" I took a deep breath, my hands steady for perhaps the first time in years. "I'm safe. I'm with people who accept me as Emma. I'm not coming home." "You're making a huge mistake," she hissed. "This little rebellion ends now." I ended the call, my heart racing but my resolve firm. That afternoon, I met with Lisa, a counselor at Rainbow Youth Center who specialized in transgender youth. In that bright, colorful space. She helped me understand that what my parents had done was a form of conversion therapy, forcing me into a gender identity that wasn't mine. She connected me with legal resources and explained my options. Meanwhile, my parents had launched a counterattack, filing a missing person report claiming Jordan's family had kidnapped me, spreading stories about my mental instability and manipulation by radical gender ideologists. The police investigated but, thankfully, recognized the truth of my situation. Still, I couldn't stay at Jordan's indefinitely. My parents knew where they lived, and I worried about escalation. Lisa suggested Rainbow Youth Center's emergency shelter, where I could stay while we figured out more permanent solutions. The shelter wasn't fancy, a converted Victorian house with bunk beds and shared bathrooms, but it was safe. There were other teens with stories like mine, some kicked out for being gay or transgender, others fleeing abuse. We had daily therapy and meetings with caseworkers. My caseworker, Tara, started the process for my emergency emancipation. That first night at the shelter, I wrote in my journal, documenting everything that had happened. For the first time, I signed my entry with my real name, Emma. Those 4 simple letters on paper, written in my own hand, filled me with a profound sense of rightness. Whatever came next, I was finally becoming myself. Freedom, however, came with its own kind of terror. Just days into my stay at the shelter, my parents found me. My mother's voice sliced through the common room. "I demand to see my son right now," sending me fleeing out the back door until Tara arrived. "We've contacted our lawyer," my father announced when I returned. "This ends now." In a tense private meeting, they cycled through tactics: demands, guilt, compromise offers with invisible strings attached. My mother erupted when I refused to come home, her chair crashing to the floor. This is that social worker's influence. That gender clinic filling your head with confusion. The weeks that followed brought a flurry of legal preparations. My support network grew. Jordan visited daily. My roommates at the shelter shared their own stories of rejection, and I joined a support group where others understood the pain of gender dysphoria. Then came the unexpected. My father visited alone. "I've been doing a lot of reading," he said quietly, eyes fixed on the garden path. "About gender identity. About what happens to children forced to live as someone they're not." His voice broke. "What we did to you was wrong. Your mother doesn't see it yet, but I want you to know that I'm trying to understand. Emma." My name on his lips, deliberate, genuine, sent a jolt through me. This wasn't crisis or confusion forcing the admission. This was recognition. The day of the hearing arrived too quickly. I stood before Judge Martinez, heart pounding. For 14 years, I lived as someone else. I testified. My parents created Michael to replace a child they lost, but in doing so, they lost me too. I need the chance to discover who I really am. This isn't about rebellion, it's about survival. The judge granted partial emancipation, freedom to make my own decisions about my gender, medical care, and living situation, while my parents maintained financial responsibility until I turned 18. That evening, in my new room at the transitional housing, I faced the mirror without flinching. For the first time, I saw the girl emerging from that forced disguise. Emma, 14 years old, scarred but surviving. I touched the glass, making a promise to us both. "I'll figure us out." The promise I made to myself that night wasn't just empty words. As that broken reflection stared back at me, I had no idea the journey ahead would test every ounce of my newfound strength. My first year of freedom flowed like a river finding its course. Sometimes peaceful, sometimes turbulent. At Westridge High, I enrolled as Emma Reynolds, a transfer student with an edited history. I discovered art, my grades improved, and I slowly built friendships untainted by my past. The transitional housing became a makeshift family of broken pieces somehow fitting perfectly together. My father reached out first, tentative weekly calls evolving into cafe meetings. During one such meeting, he slid a manila envelope across the table. "I found some of your baby pictures," he said quietly. "Your mother doesn't know I took them." Inside were photographs of me as an infant in pink onesies and bows, evidence that Emma had existed from the beginning. I wasn't reinventing myself. I was reclaiming what had always been mine. My mother remained distant, sending court-ordered payments in envelopes addressed to Michael Reynolds. This battle would take longer to win, if it could be won at all. Then came the unexpected. Mrs. Abernathy visiting with a silver bracelet bearing the letter E. "I know your mother many years," she said, her weathered hands covering mine. "I tell her losing son is sad, but having daughter is blessing. Hope flickered when I received a birthday card addressed to E. Reynolds. Not Emma, not Michael, just E. A month later, my mother appeared at my independence celebration, awkwardly holding a gift. Inside was a framed baby photo of me in a frilly dress sitting on her lap, inscribed, Emma, 6 months old. I'm sorry it took me so long, she whispered, voice breaking. We rebuilt relationships piece by piece. Weekly dinners, difficult conversations, small victories. By senior year, I applied to psychology programs, determined to become someone else's lifeline. On my 18th birthday, my mother presented me with a necklace bearing my name, Emma, and legal name change documents already prepared. Identity isn't what others tell you it is. It's what you know to be true even when the world insists otherwise. It's the name you whisper to yourself in the dark when no one else is listening. As I look back at the journey from Michael to Emma, I realize now that our deepest wounds can become our greatest purpose. What my parents did wasn't just about grief, it was about the dangerous power we give others to define who we are. The truth I discovered wasn't just about my gender, it was about ownership of my identity. We all face versions of this struggle, whether it's family expectations, societal pressure, or our own fear holding us captive in lives that don't fit. My story isn't over. I still struggle when my mother occasionally calls me Michael. I still flinch at certain memories. But I've learned that healing isn't about erasing scars, it's about wearing them proudly as proof of what you've survived. If my story resonated with you, if you've ever felt trapped in an identity that wasn't yours, know that freedom is possible. The name you whisper to yourself in the dark is your truth, whether anyone else acknowledges it or not. If this story touched something in you, please hit that like button and leave a comment about your own journey to authentic identity. Subscribe to hear more stories of survival and transformation, just like monasteries that remind us we're never truly alone in our struggles. Your story deserves to be heard too, and this channel is creating a community where that's possible. Join us.